She's helping leaders and organization manage through change and, here's the big word, uncertainty. Who is not uncertain right now and who doesn't feel a little bit of unease? And that is exactly what we need, and that's who she is helping. So this is the founder and CEO. I'm going to give it away right here because it's the name of her company, right? Bobbie, LaPorte and Associates. This is a consulting firm that provides leadership and organizational development programs to top 500 companies, global organizations, and not only just the big companies, but even to promising startups. Bobbie, LaPorte, I'm glad you're here. The stage is yours.
All right. Thank you, Ruben. Thank you, Tab, for inviting me. Thanks for the introduction. I've been watching the presentations today. There's some really cool stuff out there. So I hope everybody is getting a lot out of this. I know I have. So my presentation or my talk, and this is really an expansion of the TED Talk I did last year, is called Navigating Uncertainty. And the subtitle you see is Leadership Curveballs, Blind Spots, and Black Holes. So those are some of the things we're going to be talking about today. So to kick this off, let me ask you a question. Has anyone said to you recently, God, I am so bored. Things are so quiet and status quo in my life? Well, I don't know about you, but I don't hear that very often. I doubt it. Even though we've been sheltering in place and we sort of settled into a routine and maybe we're a little bored, there's been so much change and anxiety and disruption during the last year with COVID. I'm pretty confident that the status quo is history. That's just never going to be in our world again. Look, there is no doubt that we're living in one of the most challenging times in modern history across all the domains of our lives. And particularly if we look at this last year with COVID, the change that we've seen in the last year is very, very different than any change we've seen in the past. And you've heard some of that from today's speakers. This change is broad. It's structural, it's ever shifting. And in addition to that, noted futurists have recently told us that we are going to see more change in the next 2 years than we've seen in the last 10. So fasten your seatbelt. One thing is for certain, we wake up each day in a new world where there is no control, no certainty of what's coming next or how to plan for tomorrow. And there's definitely, as I said, no status quo. And I know that feeling well, because when I trained for an Ironman race, I never know what the trail will bring. So I've learned to embrace uncertainty. So welcome to whatever you want to call this, VUCA 2.0, post-COVID, the new normal, whatever you think you want to call what we've been living through for the last year. But this is also the environment that I've been dealing with my clients here in Silicon Valley. So this is an environment that I'm very familiar with, even pre-COVID. But today in my talk, I'd like to try and move beyond this a little bit into a state that I call VUCA ready. We'll talk more about that as I get into my talk. But this is a new framework for leading through uncertainty that I'll introduce to you in a little bit. But first, let's start with the leadership challenges that I kick this off with that you see on the title slide. You know, when we're struggling to just get through each day without giving into some crisis or major flare-up, our best efforts to balance the losses we face with the possibilities we might see can easily slip away. So many times we find ourselves operating on autopilot. And I know you probably heard that term and you're familiar with it. But if you're not, just picture a pilot in an airplane. When he puts the plane into autopilot mode, he takes his hands off the wheel, right? He is no longer in control. This is similar to how we operate when we are in autopilot. When we're in autopilot mode, we give into the unconscious, habitual responses that we use to guide the hundreds of choices and decisions we make each day. I mean, sure, we're effective, we're getting things done, but are we consciously making choices that leverage all the possibilities in our lives? Or are we just checking off boxes? Let me share a situation with you and see if this sounds familiar. Someone on your team comes to you to get your advice on how he can approach a very challenging situation he's facing. Now, you want to be open, you want to listen, you want to let him share his thinking. But as soon as he starts outlining his idea, You hear keywords that raise a big red flag and you think, no, 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 this is a terrible idea. This approach will never work. So now autopilot is in full operational mode. So what do? Well, you react, you interrupt, you tell him why his idea will not work, and you explain what you think he should do instead. So have you ever found yourself doing this? Has anyone ever done this to you? Yeah, I'm sure they have. Because this happens all the time at work and in our personal lives. And when it does, the other person shuts down, and you can be sure that they will think more than twice about asking you for your help again. So let's take another look at this situation. You could have heard your team member out. You could have asked questions and redirected his thinking to possibly a more relevant solution. But that's not what you did. Instead, you hardly listened, and you imposed your ideas on him rather than helping him create a solution that he could feel was his own. Autopilot has turned this conversation into a lost opportunity and has shut off possibility. So can you see how easily that happened? Possibilities slip away when we focused on what was asked for, which in this case was advice and feedback, instead of what was really needed, which was building capacity and connection. With the best of intentions, you let autopilot take over. You lost the opportunity to genuinely connect, and you lost the opportunity to build capacity in him, as well as in yourself to handle similar issues in the future. You are shortchanging everyone in this transaction because you chose to react rather than thoughtfully respond. Your natural inclination was to take the easy way out, to let autopilot take over. But autopilot creates blind spots and it shuts off choice. So Ryan, for some reason, my slides aren't advanced. Oh, there we go. Sorry, everyone. Okay, just getting used to this. So as I said, autopilot shuts off choice and possibility. So listen, don't misunderstand me. Autopilot is necessary for us to function. 90% of our responses every day are habitual and unconscious, and that's fine when we're brushing our teeth or we're tying our kids' shoes, but not when we need to make conscious choices and connections with others. And with all the demands on our time, and with things changing so quickly in our world, our best intentions to be thoughtful and deliberate are often lost when we react rather than respond to people and situations. Also, being on autopilot doesn't build the capacity that you need to deal with future issues. It favors past practices that are no longer relevant, and it creates an experience that shuts down future, deep, connecting conversations. The real problem for us is that autopilot is the tool of choice when we're feeling stressed and overwhelmed. And really, who doesn't feel stressed and overwhelmed at least a dozen times a day? It is very seductive to use autopilot when you're in the line of fire because it masquerades as experience and effectiveness. But it creates just the opposite effect, shifting our focus on what to fix, and that limits our choices. Recognizing this, creating an awareness of what's going on around you allows you to add perspective and guides your focus instead to an outcome that balances loss with possibility. So let me share with you another scenario that might be all too familiar to those of you who lead and influence at work. So picture this. You've been working on a strategic initiative with your team that has high visibility in the organization. Your team is energized and excited about their work on this important project. It has been their focus now for several months, and even your peers in the organization are starting to take note of the exposure this has given you and your team. So your boss calls you to a meeting, which you think is to compliment you and your team for their hard work and the progress they've made on this project. You walk into the office, ready for the high fives, and instead, he throws you a curveball. The project is off the table. The CEO has a new focus and wants to take a different direction. So now what? I mean, you are stunned. You know that your team will be demoralized and demotivated, and you worry about how this will reflect on you in the organization. So now what do you do? Well, let me share with you a personal perspective, because this situation is very similar to my experience when I'm training to compete in an Ironman triathlon. So for those of you who don't know what an Ironman is, it's a long distance triathlon. It starts with a 2.4-mile open water swim, followed by a 112-mile bike ride, and then it ends with a full marathon, 26.2 miles. So that's 140.6 human-powered miles. The event starts at 7 a.m. and you have until midnight to finish. So let me tell you, it's a long, long day. And just for context, I did not grow up as an athlete. I was a student. I was uncoordinated. I wasn't interested in sports. I was interested in school and I was interested in work. And it wasn't until I turned 50, that sort of magic age when we begin to take note of our mortality, that I did my first marathon. And then I got hooked by endurance sports. I did my first Ironman when I turned 53. So I have very, very little athletic ability. I work very hard at what I do. I have discipline. I have perseverance. I have determination. I'm not fast, but I finish. So this, I'm having trouble banting my slides again. There we go. This is a picture of an Ironman swim start. So that I'm in there someplace. That's me and 2,500 fellow competitors in the water at them when the gun goes off. We call this combat swimming. To prepare for this, I trained for at least 9 months, often twice a day. I pushed my body to limits I never thought possible. I paid the price for neglected relationships. I experienced pain and suffering. Actually, there's a lot of pain and suffering. And I make sacrifices in all areas of my life to get ready. Then I arrive at the event only to realize that literally nothing is guaranteed. Nothing. Because race day will certainly throw me a curveball. And at some point in the day, I will need to balance loss with possibility. Because regardless of how much I've trained, I have to rely on my ability and preparedness to navigate through uncertainty. So, for example, will someone kick me during the swim? I mean, you see that from the photograph, from the slide, what it's like. Knock off my goggles, and then what? Then I'm blind in the water. I mean, will I get a flat on my bike, or maybe 2 flats? One year I got stung by bees. Will the running shoes that felt just great 2 weeks ago now create giant blisters that make me wince with every step? If something like that happens, and it always does, I could say, you know what, it's just not my day. I guess it's just not meant to be, and take myself out of the game. And let me tell you, I have done that before, and it is so demoralizing and disappointing. Not just to me, but for everyone who supported me along the way. Let me tell you, it takes a small army to get me across the finish line. Or I could look at the situation and think, you know what? I have invested way too much in this to give in and give up. I'm going to take the progress I've made and find a way to cross that damn finish line. So I'm thinking possibility, not loss. So how does this apply to our example of your project that was jettisoned by the CEO? Well, we all have to prepare for curveballs like this. And in today's business environment of change and unrelenting uncertainty, this type of curveball is not that unusual. It's easy for something like this to happen when you're focused on a major project, you're keeping your team on track, you're executing your plan. But when things change, and they will, it's normal to get thrown off, to be disappointed and discouraged. but this is just the opposite of what your team needs from you right now. So just like in my Ironman experience, there are two ways you can respond to this curveball. If you're on autopilot, you might respond, all that work for nothing, and fall back on your habitual reaction that creates a, oh, well, too bad for the team, I guess we'll just start over kind of response. Or you can take a different approach and not see this as a loss, but see it from the mindset of possibility. What if you make this turn of events an opportunity to create a different project that is really unique, that will stand out and be appreciated, that your team will really feel proud of? And instead of looking at the problem and wondering where the solution will come from, you can ask yourself this question: what are our strengths? What are the best tools we have at our disposal that we can draw on to create the best path forward? I like to think of approaching situations like this as stripping them for parts, not throwing it all away, but finding what is good and useful to move your team forward. In the heat of the moment, you might not think to consider asking yourself these questions, but they will make you think differently. They will allow you to develop a broader portfolio of options and to balance loss, once again, with possibility. So let's switch gears for a minute now. I've been talking in the beginning of this, in the beginning of this talk, I've outlined a couple of themes when I talked about blind spots and I talked about curveballs. And in those examples, I emphasized building capacity in yourself and others and seeing what is possible. But I mentioned at the beginning of this talk the concept of VUCA. So many of you probably are familiar with this, but if you're not, VUCA was originally a military term that was used to describe the conditions for engagement by the Army in the Middle East. So VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. I'm still trying to advance my slide here. Oh, no, I need to go back. Nope, okay. Well, I think we're missing a slide, but that's okay. All right, so I'll just stick with this one for now. So VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. We have, in the work that we do, we have a framework for leading through challenging times that's called VUCA Ready. And there's a slide here that describes it, but for some reason it's not there. But I have an infographic handout that you can access from my website after the talk if you'd like. So in our model, VUCA has a different meaning. The V stands for volatile, and the U stands for uncertainty. But the C is for capacity. We talked about building capacity in yourself and others. And the A is for achievement through a possibilities mindset. So in our model of VUCA, we're acknowledging the changing and uncertain environment that we're operating in. But we're also focusing on the importance of building capacity, in ourselves and our teams, and in achieving more through a possibilities mindset. So this VUCA Ready that we're talking about, this framework, it's a state, it's a new mindset, and a leadership benchmark. So let me take a couple of minutes to explain this a little bit further. So the C in VUCA Ready stands for capacity building. So we define capacity building as an intentional mode of thinking and operating that enables you to develop real, generative options to issues you're facing, instead of automatically reacting and fixing things based on what you've done in the past. Because being in charge of your emotions and your thought process creates an environment where you can explore what is really possible, not just what's known and reasonable, so that you can create capacity in yourself and others to handle future issues more effectively. So let's take a look at an example of how this might be applied. Now, more than ever, our teams are clamoring for direction, right? I mean, they're weighed down by fear and anxiety from the uncertainty surrounding us, they're coming to you or coming to leaders and saying, tell me what to do. I mean, you've probably heard that before, right? And for leaders, this can be very reassuring because we're used to people relying on us for direction. So we feel a sense of normalcy in this response. And it can become the easy default when everything feels like it's up in the air. But it also creates a false sense of control and unmet expectations because your team will continue to rely on you for answers, and none of us have them. The more dangerous consequence of telling your team what to do is that you're not asking them to use their skills and experience to leverage their strengths and build capacity in themselves. So instead of telling them what to do, you might ask questions like, what do we need to get there? What do we already have? And what are other ways that these talents can be used? With these simple questions, you're connecting your team members with their strengths. You're helping them to see their gifts in a different way, to expand on what they already do well, and to help them become more confident and self-sufficient in the future. So now in this VUCA model, let's look at the last letter, the A, which is achievement through a possibilities mindset. And as we said earlier, it's really critical for leaders in this environment of unrelenting uncertainty to look at it from a place of possibility, not a place of resignation and defeat. So how do you achieve more? How do you develop a possibilities mindset? Being consistently able to see what is possible and achieve more depends on our ability to develop what we call strategic awareness, which is really being able to retrospectively look at what's happened in the past, be in the present, understand the challenge, and then project out to the future how you can use your knowledge and your skills and talents to develop a solution to move forward. So here's a question for you. How often does someone on your team come to you with a problem and you immediately go into autopilot or fix-it mode? Does that sound like a familiar approach to you? I know to many of us does. Wouldn't it be better if you could stop for a few seconds, ask relevant questions, and connect your team member with what they already know and can do to help them develop possible options to consider? So in this way, and in this approach, seeing what's possible and achieving more by that goes hand in hand with building capacity in your team. They're both tightly connected and essential to being VUCA ready. There's lots of practices and ways you can get off autopilot. And I know that Jason Campbell tomorrow is going to talk about some meditation practices. That's definitely a really good vehicle. So I would definitely tune in and see what he has to share. But a simple first step in creating this strategic awareness is just to take the time to recognize what's going on around us. It takes intention, it takes self-awareness, and it takes discipline. But stopping to think, adding only a few seconds to your decision-making process can create the space and perspective to develop other options and not just limit yourself to what autopilot serves up. And that is your first step to achieving more by seeing what's possible. So now let's take a look at our final leadership challenge, which, as I said in the beginning, is called the black hole. So even though this concept is based in science, I think we can all identify with it. The feeling of staring into the abyss, not knowing what to do next, particularly in this COVID environment. And this can happen when you're faced with a significant or unexpected change that comes out of nowhere. Something major, for instance, that happens in your organization. So in this uncertain world that we live in, internal changes have been kind of common, but we're still never quite ready for them. We did some research last year. We surveyed 200 tech executives on what was their number one challenge dealing with uncertainty. And they said it was internal change. I mean, how many times do you talk to your colleagues or friends and they say, oh my God, we had another reorg, we had another change, I have a new boss. So internal change is very common. And as I said, it's one of the biggest challenges in dealing with uncertainty. So what do you do when something really big hits you and your team? Like all of a sudden your boss is gone or the whole organization's in transition. You have no idea who's really in charge. The ground feels like it's moving under you. So with change like this, it's just too much, it's too major, it's too sudden. You just can't get your bearings. When this happens, it feels like you're not in control. You recognize it, your team feels it. This is a stop on your journey that you had not planned for or anticipated. And to add to the drama and challenge, many of your colleagues probably are also feeling rudderless, right? So they're mourning the loss of the familiar, what they were just getting used to. They're digging their heels in against just one more change to deal with. So now what do you do? Well, in this case, I believe using your personal power of agency can be the difference between moving forward or not. So what I suggest you do when you're in this sort of, undefined, unknown sort of black hole situation is to let go of the exact what that you're going to do next. And instead, just focus on movement. Just focus on doing something. Take action. Just set a new process in motion, one step at a time, focusing on what you believe right now is really needed by the business. It doesn't have to be the perfect move. It just has to be what makes sense for you now. It just has to involve taking action. And this will restore some sense of normalcy for your team to show them a path forward out of this situation, even if you're not exactly sure what the road ahead looks like, because no one does. But taking some action and avoiding going down, it will help you avoid going down this black hole of resignation and defeat. It's really important, I think. We need to remember to take advantage of the agency that we have, but that we often forget to use. So we talked about these three challenges: blind spots, curveballs, and black holes. They all involve taking action. We've covered several examples of that, and not relying on what you've experienced or default to what you've done in the past. We also know from brain science that taking action, taking a positive approach to dealing with issues like this actually impacts brain cognition and structure. So you build capacity to handle future issues more effectively. So by acting, by taking forward motion, by taking a positive approach to the challenges I've outlined today, you're actually training your brain at the same time that you're developing solutions that have greater and more lasting impact. And I know this as well from my Ironman racing experience, because what I choose to do, emphasis on choice, what I choose to do sets the stage for what happens next, and it creates conditions for success down the road. In a world where things are certain, our natural inclination is to do what seems easy and reasonable, to rely on what's comfortable and known. And in our 24/7 wired, post-COVID, new normal, whatever you want to call it world, our brains just don't want to work that hard. We're all on cognitive overload, so we revert to what's worked in the past. In an uncertain world, it can be very difficult because of that to approach your work and your life from a possibilities mindset. Look, there's no question uncertainty can put us on the defense, avoiding risk instead of embracing opportunity. Uncertainty can knock you off your game and lead to exhaustion and resignation. You give in, and then you give up. But I believe uncertainty can also be a gift because it releases you to look at challenges from a place of what can be, not a place of resignation. Through my Ironman training, I discovered my capabilities and my vulnerabilities, and I learned how to find the what is possible in any situation. This transformational experience allowed me to help others see what's possible for them. So here is my challenge today to all of you. when you are faced with the unrelenting uncertainty of the world we continue to live in, when you are in the line of fire, try to live life balancing loss with possibility. The Ironman motto is anything is possible. And I know from my own experience that that is true. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, we actually do have some questions. Are you going to ask her one too? Oh, okay. Way to throw me in here. All right, let's do this. Question from Kathy. I've run some marathons in the past, and I'm thinking about competing in an Ironman next year. What's the secret to moving to the next level in endurance racing? There's a part 2 to this too, just so you know.
Okay. Well, that's interesting, Kathy, because I did my first marathon, I mentioned, when I turned 50. And I did another one, and I did another one, and then I did a small triathlon. So I would start with something small. The Ironman was that was sort of one of these like life-changing things when someone said, you should train for an Ironman. And I thought, oh my God, that is so sexy. I mean, I could say I'm an Ironman, and little did I know how much pain and suffering was going to be involved. So there's a lot of people who start as marathoners and then go to triathlon. And I would definitely either get in a training program with somebody, because it is a long training period. And during that period, you'll do a short distance and a longer distance. So you ramp up just like you did when you trained for your marathon. But trust me, as I said, I am a total non-athlete. I did my first one when I was 53. So I just say, if I can do it, good luck. Anybody can do it.
Absolutely. The part 2 to that question was, do you use your experience in endurance racing to help you in business? And if so, how?
I do. When I first started training for my, started training for my first Ironman, the executives that I was working with, they noticed something different. They said, there's something different about you. And I started studying the connection between endurance sports or physical fitness and leadership. And there's a definite connection between how you push yourself, how you manage yourself through challenging times, how you stay sort of emotionally stable. There's no big highs, there's no lows. And so I use that in my own business, but it's also something, because of what I've accomplished and because of how I understand now to navigate through uncertainty and difficult times, it's also something that I use with all of my executive coaching and all my consulting clients.
Wonderful. I hope that answers Kathy's question. And also thank you, Kathy, for asking that.
Yeah, good luck, Kathy.
The next one comes from Alex. He says, when scaling a company, change management can be one of the largest challenges. How do you implement change in a growing company?
Oh, that's something that I'm very familiar with, because most of my clients, I like to call where I live here, Silicon Valley, it's like a hair on fireplace, right? So a lot of my clients, they're all tech clients. Most of them are like doubling their employee base and their ARR every year. So the way that I deal with leadership teams in managing change through when you have a company that's scaling really quickly, it goes back to, I think it was Alex who asked this question, this whole idea about building capacity. So for most people, when you're in a growing company, especially if it's an early stage company, it's the biggest job they've ever had. They've never been a CMO or a COO or CRO. So I help them to really up their game, right? Build capacity in themselves at the same time, trying to get them to do the same thing for the people under them, so that they're upping their game, they're building capacity in their teams. And there's lots of different practices that I use in this information graphic that Ruben remind me to mention this before the end, has some practices in there. But everything I do in terms of the kinds of ways I help people capacity and to manage change is through scientific practices. So, I have a master's degree in positive leadership, where I draw on positive psychology, neuroscience, behavioral science. So my clients don't have time for anything. So when I can give them a science-based practice that's scalable and that shows them quick results, it really helps them to embrace change and be able to accelerate what they're trying to do.
Absolutely. So we have one more question. This one's from a groupie of yours. Tab, if you want to ask your question.
Groupie. Groupie.
Okay, maybe not one more question. The first one is a marathon anything like a buffet? Because I've eaten at a few buffets.
Want to try that out? Yeah.
I've eaten at a few buffets before, and it feels like a marathon.
Yeah.
Okay. Serious question.
Yeah.
When you look at the changes that are going on inside of an organization, and you're a leader at a company that's going through these changes, and you have that uncertainty yourself, you're like, I don't know what's going to happen. How do you build confidence and a level of assurance with those people that report to you without being dishonest or faking it?
Yeah. I like to use a new definition of, what confidence and competence means. So when I grew up, and I spent the first 15 years of my career at IBM, when I grew up in the business, competence and confidence, it was all about like top down. The leader had all the answers. It was like command and control. They basically told you what to do and you said fine. In this environment we're in now, that whole model has really flipped. And so confidence and competence now in strategic leadership comes from a very different place. You don't have the answer. So it comes from introspection. It comes from being open to other people's ideas. It comes from being willing to admit that you don't have the answer or asking for help. So all these things you've heard about vulnerability and empathy in terms of leadership, I think that those are the characteristics that successful leaders are exhibiting now. That's how they're helping them connect with their organization. And the really successful leaders I work with just tell people, they say, look, I don't have the answers. This is what I do know, but I'm not sure about these things because no one knows, because the road ahead is totally unclear. So they just say, I rely on you. I know you have skills. I know you have information. We're going to figure this out together.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because sometimes you hear that, that dishonesty or that, trying to put forth something that's not there because, you want a level of continuity. So I appreciate that. Another question that I have, and then this is probably our last question. When you have different people inside your organization that respond differently to anything, and maybe one person who's a leader is more quick, more active, more not results oriented, but moves at a speed that might be greater than other people. Like maybe other people are more thoughtful, want to think about things, or they're more methodical. Whatever that is, how do you balance giving an employee the space that they need in order to do something, as opposed to just saying move? Yeah,
that's tough. I think really good leaders are in tune, and it's more challenging in a virtual environment, are in tune with the styles and the motivations and the stressors and the needs of the people that work for them. So you may have some people that have the same style if you're, type A, fast paced, but there's other people who have a different style. And I think the real key to effective leadership is to be able to understand that, to honor it, to be able to tap into what people really do well. And I think if you can, as a leader, if you can exhibit that vulnerability and that empathy and that let's figure this out together, and then what are the skills of the team? I talked about how do you leverage people's strengths and amplify them and deploy them and use them in different ways. It's just bringing people together in that vision, and you'll find that people will step up. But it is particularly challenging now because you don't have the ability to sit with somebody around the table and get to know them. So it's definitely more of a challenge, I think, in a virtual environment.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Hey, Bobbie, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate you taking the time. You did have something you wanted to make sure everybody got, and
if I can just mention, so this framework, it's called VUCA Ready, and so I had a slide, but I'm not quite sure what happened to it. But if you go to my website, which is BobbieLaPorte.com, and /VUCA Ready, VUCA READY. There's a one-page infographic that talks about the concepts I had in my talk today, introduces the framework for being VUCA ready, and you're welcome to go there and download that. And then there's lots of other resources there. So just dig in, and if there's anything I can do for you, let me know. Thanks again, Tab.
Thank you.
Welcome to Refiners. Refiners is an organization of business owners and business professionals that are looking to improve their business and personal performance, just like you. As a Refiners member, you will have the opportunity to build connections with like-minded individuals from your industry. Join our amazing community for free at refiners.io.